never seen that happen before. Okay. So we stopped last time in the middle of the excavation at Pylos, Apano Inglianos, the hill in southwestern Greece, the territory of Mycenaea, Messenia, where Carl Blegen went in 1939, very poor year to start an excavation, in search of the palace of Nestor. Why? Because Nestor was one of the big guns of the Trojan War, according to the text in the Iliad. Man took 90 ships to Troy, second most after Agamemnon, and Blegen hit pay dirt. Actually, that's a term that archaeologists do not like to use. We don't use that term, pay dirt. Not about money. It's not about treasure. Forget I said that. Anyway, found a lot of great stuff immediately upon breaking ground at Pylos, including what has now come to be recognized as a hallmark of the Mycenaean period palatial complexes, that is not just at Mycenae, but in all of the late Bronze Age, also known as Mycenaean palace centers. So the Menelaon at Sparta, Tiryns, Mycenae, and now Pylos. A Megaron complex, 3 rooms, axially arranged, 2 columns in the front porch, and then in the very, very large back room, an enormous hearth, 4 meters in diameter, pretty much the same from place to place. And you see here Blegen's workmen uncovering that enormous hearth, which dominated the rear and largest room of the Megaron. Also in that very first season, over 1,000 tablets in this weird script that is written on ruled tablets on which lines have been pre-incised like a spiral-bound notebook rule paper, and an earlier kind of script written on tablets with ruled lines had been found on the island of Crete about 50 years earlier, and that script still undeciphered was called Linear A. So this being the second such script like that found, it's called Linear B. These Linear B tablets were deciphered by Michael Ventris in 1952, and so they can be read. We would have hoped they'd be wonderful, imaginative narrative poetry, or at least informative historical documents, or maybe very interesting political or diplomatic correspondence telling us about these great kings and what they've done, but no. They are boring, boring, boring administrative documents. So this one, for example, records the transfer of cow and pig hides to shoe and saddle makers. Totally on. And this one is for furniture makers. It tells about the acquisition and the dissemination of goods that people who are making furniture, chairs and tables would need. Having such things in the palace tells us that while it's a palace, we can call it a palace in the sense of somebody important lived here, obviously. It's primarily an administrative hub. The economy, which looks to be completely centralized and controlled from one politically important place, that economy was centered here in the main building of these palatial centers. These are really central distribution, taking in and taking out, giving out points for the economy at large in the region. If you want to know more about the Linear B tablets, you would be well advised to look at the Aegean Bronze Age website, which you can get to from the portal, and click on the lesson that's about Linear B tablets, and then you can learn more about them. What about, nobody's asked me about, nobody has raised their hand and said, gee, Professor Berlin, what about religion? What is going on here? You all remember what little we could discern about religious practice at Troy, right? What do you remember about that? What do you remember?
Troy?
Troy.
Yeah, like temples for some gods down there. Troy.
Temples for gods at Troy. Yes? Temples for gods at Troy? Yes? Let's have a big resounding no. Oh, so sorry. No. No temples at Troy. What do we have at Troy? What do we have?
The stones near the gateways.
Stones near their gateways, which are called stelae. Do they have anything on them? No. So they are, we call that in the biz, ready? Here's a jargon word for you. Aniconic. 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 It means without images. An icon is an image. If it's aniconic, there's no image. Aniconic. Aniconic stelae in front of the gateways. Many. We haven't seen anything like that at any of the Mycenaean palatial centers, nor will we. But at a few of them, there is evidence for, we can call it religious practice or cult practice, what have you. We don't have that evidence from up here. That is to say, we don't have the finds that suggest it, the small finds. But at Mycenae, you're looking here at an aerial view of Mycenae. In this area, inside the perimeter wall, but below the top of the citadel. So here's Great Circle A. The Lion Gate is there, right there. It's just off the screen and backwards, which is how come you can't see it. And if you come in the long path, then right there is a pretty fascinating complex, which in plan is here. Inside multi-room, but not especially elaborated or well-planned looking room, building. That is, there are several rooms, but it's not some majestic, axely arranged, large, impressive edifice. It looks like a house. And inside, there was, in the center room, after you first walked in the main door, a series of plastered benches, sort of raised, plastered platforms. And standing on one of the platforms was a terracotta figure, must be a female because she has breasts, arms upraised, this sort of quizzical, cute, wide-eyed expression on her face, and some odd-looking thing on her head, some sort of cap-like thing on her head, and no lower body to speak of. That is, she's just a cylinder with the key elements of her upper torso delineated only, but clearly figural and clearly gendered. In the back room, let me see, what have I got? Oh yeah, in the room immediately behind, where there was this series of platforms and this, let's call her a goddess, where this little figurine of a goddess was standing. There was a cache, a room that had been. In later times, the door had been closed over and whitewashed over, but the excavators found inside there a cache of 8 large and 8 smaller figures, terracotta also. Terracotta, not gold, ivory, bronze, not even wood with some sort of metallic covering, but the lowest grade material possible, terracotta. And in addition, there were 14 terracotta snakes, and you see some of them here, coiled up There's the cute little snake head. Some of the terracotta figures, the large terracotta figures, are gendered, that is, they have breasts. Some of them just seem to have a barrel chest. They don't have breasts to speak of. The original excavator divided them in two and thought that those with breasts were female and those without were male, and that all of them could be interpreted as votaries, that is, representations of people who either worked for or were bringing offerings for or stood in as a physical representation of somebody bringing offerings to the goddess who was worshipped here. It's not precisely clear that gender was uppermost in the mind of the people who were making these to be represented, because some of the figures look to have a kind of combination of features. So, for example, this figure has breasts and a beard, you may notice. So it just could be, and some other scholars have postulated, that our idea that, there are these two categories and you fall into one or you fall into the other, and it matters, may not have been their idea. And if you want to know more about this, very interesting, I encourage you to go to the lesson on the Aegean Bronze Age chronology site about Mycenaean religion, where you can read many, many details about this very interesting place. Right near, but not accessed from it directly, near, let's call it the shrine building, was another structure, and it had something sort of Megaron-y like in its plan. You could walk in a narrow end. It didn't have it wasn't a Megaron in the sense of the Mycenaean palatial Megaron. It wasn't 3 rooms, it wasn't very large, didn't have columns, but it's a longer structure, and you walk in the narrow end, and the room that you then enter past that has a hearth in the middle and a bench along the back, and another series of idols were found there, and there was and so let's see. So here's the shrine area. I forgot I was actually going to show you this. So here's the shrine area, and here is the plastered platform, and there's benches in the back, and this is the little room in the back where the cache of 8 large and 8 small idols and the coiled up snakes were found. And then here's this other structure, and I see that I have misled you. The Megaron-like shrine, that's at the next site, so just forget that I said that. Anyway, here's this room that's next to it, and when you walk in, again, there is a platform, and this room had frescoes on the walls, and the frescoes show 3 larger figures and 2 smaller figures, and the larger figures are all female, the 2 smaller figures are male, and one of these larger female figures, who you see here, is standing in front of a column, and so I think we are supposed to assume that she is in the vicinity of some sort of special building. Now, the only buildings that we know of at the Mycenaean palatial sites with columns are the big megara, the ones in the middle, like at Mycenae, for example, the one on the top of the Citadel. There are those 2 columns when you first walk in. And she's holding what have been interpreted to be torches. So she is processing in, and she is holding up flaming torches, and she too has a most peculiar headdress tucked nicely behind her ear, as you see, and a sadly receding chin. Obviously the person who did this had not super well studied the human profile, or I don't know, maybe she looked like this. Yes?
Where was this in relation to the idols?
Where was this in relation to the idols? The idols were in this room and this room of this house, and the frescoes are in this. And all of them are down here, and you see in this reconstruction drawing, again, here's the lion gate, Here's grave circle A. The big Megaron is up here. And so the shrine area is actually outside the original walls of the city. This is the original wall of the city. I told you last time that at Pylos, lots of frescoes were found. Pylos was not the only place where a lot of frescoes were found. All the palatial centers that have been found had frescoes, decorated wall paintings. So Pylos, the Mycenaean, other of the palatial centers that I haven't bothered to tell you about, Thebes, and so forth. Tyrannus, frescoes. Here's the interesting thing. There are many interesting things about the frescoes. If you're interested in reading more about the frescoes, you can go to the lesson on Mycenaean pictorial art in the Aegean Bronze Age site. There are shown in all of the frescoes from all of the sites men, women, animals, scenes of various sorts, like I showed you the other day from Pylos, 2 guys in a chariot. Showed you a bunch of dogs, recumbent dogs, looking very alert and guard-like, lined up. Yes?
I have a question about how do they figure out what is like on the whole picture if they only have that little?
How do they figure out what's on the whole picture if they only have these little pieces? Well, a lot of the frescoes are repetitive, so we might have some fragments from one site and then other fragments from another site that are clearly of the same sort of scene, and there is enough overlap that it's reasonable to reconstruct them all. Also, and this is kind of like a big secret that I haven't really shared with any of you, I'm trying to figure out how to say this in a way that won't freak you out or confuse you. There's a whole nother, somewhat earlier palatial civilization in the Greek world based on the island of Crete, which I have not shared with you, but perhaps some of you may know about. And they had a lot of painted walls in their palaces. And the Mycenaeans conquer Crete. They do. And then they're in charge. So in fact, there's a huge cache of linear B tablets from the main palace on Crete. Anyway, the real point is there's a lot of even better preserved fresco painting there, and a lot of the scenes are the same as these scenes, so those provide even more of a model for us. So you can trust it. You can trust these reconstructions. They're not just made up out of whole cloth. The most common sort of figure in the frescoes are women, and the largest figures in the frescoes are women. And sometimes, like in the representations in the room of the frescoes near the shrine at Mycenae, it's obvious that some of the women, or it would appear that some of the women actually should be seen as goddesses, not mortal. They wear much more decorated clothing, like this woman here, and fancy headdresses, and yes, and they are generally larger than the men. So those were a couple from Tyrannus, and you just saw the woman with the torches from Mycenae, and here are a few very proudly strutting women from Pylos, who have a quite peculiar way of dressing, borrowed from the island of Crete, I would say. And we have not only fresco representations of this very interesting way of dressing, but we have sculptures as well that depict it, in case you're thinking, no, is that really what I think I'm seeing? Yes, it is. And here, again, is another very, very large and elegant woman's face with a kind of a diadem and some sort of a crown on her head. Again, possibly also a deity from Pylos. I have no idea why I put this back in here. let's see what's coming up next. Yeah, okay. So, that's what you get for rearranging your lecture 10 times. Mycenaean is not the only place where a shrine with terracotta idols has been found. So these are the figures from Mycenaean. Also at Tiryns, this is the place where there was found a, Jerry Rutter in his description calls it Megaroid. Megaroid shrine, by which he means a building which is longer than it is wide, with the entrance on the short side. But the Megaroid shrine at Tiryns has 2 rooms, just a little sort of anteroom, and then a main room in the back. That main room has a hearth and a bench along the back, and the excavators found on the bench in the back of the room more of these standing idols. As you can read from this old caption, there were a couple of phases. This one was from the earlier phase, and then these 2 were from the later phase. And you see that the idols in the later phase, especially this one, have become even more what we call schematic, less realistic. So she's got fingers on her hands, but she just has what you might think of as little wings. It's if she's wearing a poncho and she didn't want to take her hands out, or she's just got her elbow sticking up. But I think you can assume that that representation is supposed to be upraised hands, as if she is a deity, or perhaps more likely that she is in awe of a deity. That is, she is a votary bringing something to a deity who's not then specifically represented inside the shrine. We have lots of evidence that the idea of a representation of either a deity or a votary was not strictly confined to the palaces, because in houses and in tombs, not Tholos tombs, but late Helladic cisgraves, that is, regular people, not rulers, we find terracotta figurines. There are found terracotta figurines, many, of 2 shapes. Ones that are very similar to the large terracotta figures, some of which stand 2 feet high. Incidentally, they're pretty sizable. They're not necessarily so little. Yeah, I guess I didn't tell you the measurements of the ones in the shrine at Mycenaean, but I know that number, so I'm going to share it with you. It's so rare that I remember a number exactly. The large terracotta idols are about 50 to 60 centimeters high, so like that. And the smaller ones are about 28 centimeters high, so about like that. But these, magnified many times on the screen before you, are like this, about 6 to 8 inches high. So they're little. Terracotta, painted very simply, dark on light paint, and with these weeny, highly schematic, sort of bird-like heads with noses that almost look like beaks and little eyes. They are called after the Greek letters that they resemble. So the Greek letters, it's always good to be able to teach this on a college campus where everybody knows these Greek letters because of fraternities and sororities. So they are called Psi and Phi figurines because they look like the Greek letters Psi, and Phi. And sometimes, usually they're singular, that is just a single figure, like this Psi figurine here. But sometimes there's a whole group, but you can't call it a family group. Well, maybe you could, but all 3 of these figures are female. And why they're shaped like this, I cannot. You can just make your own guess. We don't have any idea why they're shaped like this. Like, where are their arms? Are they in cloaks? Are the stripes on the body supposed to be clothing? Sure, why not? Could be. We don't know. Question? All right. Again, I need to look ahead to see what. Oh, all right. So, what goes on in the Megaron. When we first looked at them, and when they were first found, we just assumed it was the kind of throne room of the palace. But that doesn't seem completely reasonable considering the evidence that we have to hand. So, for one thing, if it's a throne room, why is the main seat on the side of the room? Why isn't it arranged so that when you are coming in to the Megaron, you see the throne? I mean, everybody knows from every comic book and cartoon strip about kings that, you know, you walk in and you see the king directly, and he sits way up high, and he sits right in front of you, and you walk in and then you prostrate yourself in front of him. But you would not be able to see the person sitting on the throne. In fact, what's clearly the most dominant feature in all of the Megara is not the throne at all, it's the hearth. And this is a serious piece of construction. Very, very large, dominates the room, takes up most of the space, and has to be the point, not just the focal point, but the point of the complex. Then there's the issue of, at least at Pylos, where we have all this good representation, the things that are found around them. So in all of these rooms on the sides of the Megara are thousands, literally thousands of vessels, especially drinking vessels, kind of hyper number of drinking vessels. So you recall that in one room alone near the Megaron, in room 20, were 2,853 kylokes, these stemmed goblets. So the hearth, which we know to have been used, I mean, the hearths, when they're found, they have been used. There's burned material on them, so they're not just ceremonial. Leads one to wonder just who it was who was sitting on that throne or chair and what the point of the hearth was. And there is a debate among scholars of the Mycenaean world, of whom I am not one. I don't specialize in the Bronze Age. I don't get involved in this debate. I'm simply a reporter here. I report that there is a debate, and the debate is who was sitting on the throne. We know from the Linear B tablets that there was a position of king. We have the word, not just once, multiple times. And we have the evidence from the shrines, the idols in the shrines, and the frescoes on the walls of the primacy of a female deity and female assistants for that deity, priestesses, you could say. So there are those who think that seated on the throne, as you see in this reconstruction drawing here, was the king, and then others who believe that seated on this would have been the chief priestess of the cult that was celebrated in this room with burning of goods or food, animals, on the central hearth, whose smoke you can see dramatically going up the opening in this nice reconstruction drawing. All right. There have been found by archaeologists in the area of mainland Greece, northern and southern, 9 palatial centers. 2 in the Argolid, Mycenaean Tirans, 1 in Messenia, Pylos, 1 in Laconia, the Menelaon near Sparta, one in Attica, and that's Athens. So this region of Greece here is Attica. 3 in Boeotia, Thebes, Gla, and Orchomenos. And 1 in the great northern plains area of Greece, Thessaly, at Iolkos. These are centers discovered on the ground by archaeologists. They all date to the Late Bronze Age, which is also known as the Mycenaean period, which is also known as the Late Helladic period, which is the equivalent of the second half of Troy 6, just to get all of the ducks lined up in a row here chronologically. The preservation it varies from one to the other, so there's not, Pylos has the most well-preserved remains, Iolkos has the least well-preserved remains, but there is evidence for Megara, Tholoi, frescoes, linear B tablets, Mycenaean palatial style pottery, of which we haven't seen any of yet. And it is uncanny and very interesting that the discovery of Mycenaean palatial remains conforms quite well, not perfectly, but remarkably well, to a reconstruction of Mycenaean palatial life as reconstructed from the Iliad, not archaeology. So if you're only looking at the Greek side and you're saying, well, where were there palatial centers? Here there are palatial centers. Nestor at Pylos, Menelaus at Sparta, Agamemnon at Mycenae, Diomedes at Tiryns, Achilles from Thessaly. He's kind of big one. And various heroes from the area of Boeotia. All of these yellow dots are cities that are mentioned as homelands of various heroes from the Greek side. And what's also interesting is to see that, while I said this is not perfect, you can see lots of dots in places where we haven't found Mycenaean period palatial remains, most notably where Odysseus comes from on the island of Ithaca, or where a few other kind of important Trojan war heroes like Philoctetes, for example, come from. There have not, or not yet, been Mycenaean palatial remains found from any of those. But what's very interesting is that in those areas that are not represented in the Iliad, so Aetolia, Arcadia, where you don't see any little yellow dots, we also don't have any Mycenaean palatial remains. And the last thing to be said about this that's interesting is that for many of these places, they are not important anymore after the Bronze Age. So Pylos, for example, is practically abandoned. It's not like there's a big city on top of the Palace of Nestor. There wasn't. So in other words, it's not as if, well, for the next 500 or 600 years there were people living at all of these places, and so their particular histories and stories would have been handed down from one person to another person. The stories seem to have been handed down. We know that the Iliad is oral poetry, but not in that kind of straightforward, direct, person-to-person way, or at least not necessarily. Around the year 1300, an earthquake struck in the Argolid. The Citadel of Tiryns was partially destroyed. It was severely damaged. Many parts of the Citadel walls were cracked. Zach, you have a question? 1300 BCE. We will be in BCE until early November. 1300. Yes, in antiquity. In 1300 BCE, in antiquity, the earthquake hit and destroyed part of the remains of Tiryns, and it also damaged the nearby citadel of Mycenaean. And at both Tiryns and Mycenaean, there was rebuilding, but not just rebuilding on exactly the same lines. Building that suggests that the people who lived at these places might have been sort of worried about something, or at least interested in expanding the areas that they had under walled protection. So the original citadel of Mycenae was walled when the palace was built. But after the earthquake, the citadel walls were enlarged. And when they were enlarged, so here's the citadel and the early wall. And when they were enlarged, a lot of stuff that had been outside the main wall came to be within the wall. The walls are massive, founded directly on bedrock of cut, squared ashlar blocks in part, but in part simply roughly rounded cyclopean blocks, which as you see here at the corner of the wall extension of the citadel at Mycenae. When this wall was extended, this monumental sculpture was placed above the huge lintel of the new gate. This lintel looks just like, and in fact structurally is very similar to, the huge lintel blocks in a Tholos tomb. And the great sculpture shows two very, very large and ferocious, well-muscled, so you could imagine that they could do some damage to you if you met them in a dark alley, big felines. We call them lionesses. We don't really know. Sadly, they're missing their heads. But even though they're lionesses, the thing is called the lion gate instead of the lioness gate. These two great felines are resting their paws on either side of a stone platform on which stands a single column. A single column which probably is a sort of shorthand code for a big structure. Where is the only place that we know there to be columns on the citadel? In the forecourt of the Megaron. So they may be thought to be represented as protecting the main building on the top of the citadel. And it's at this time, right around 1300, that when the wall is expanded to include the incorporation of a lot of structures that had been outside the original citadel wall, the circle around the shaft graves of Grave Circle A was built. That's when it was built. Now, how long has it been? Figure this out here. How long has it been since anybody's been burying in the shaft graves? Longer. How long has it been? Okay, let's start. When's the last burial in Grave Circle A? That's Grave Circle B. When's the I know you guys are just thinking, somebody else is going to figure this out. Well, I'm going to call on somebody. All right, you folks in the back. When's the last burial in a shaft grave? I'm looking at you. Excellent. 1500. And what year are we in now? About 200 years. About 200 years. 200 years. 200 years ago, we hadn't even fought the Civil War, right? So that's a little while. So here, 200 years after the last burial has been placed there, this wall demarcating the grave circles is constructed. In addition to expanding the walls, enclosing the grave circle, yes?
Didn't you say that one of those tombs went over one of the grave circles?
I did.
So how would they know, and you said they might have not known then, so how would they know now? So the wall around it.
That is a very good question. So it was grave circle B that was partially damaged, or anyway, partially obscured by the so-called tomb of Clytemnestra. That's the particular tholos that partially overlies grave circle B, demonstrating, as you very aptly point out, that either they didn't know or they didn't care that there were graves there. And in fact, the circle that goes around grave circle A is nicely placed vis-a-vis the lion gate and the wall, but is very messy in terms of demarcating the graves of grave circle A. So you'll see in this drawing, for example, that all the big shaft graves are actually on one side of the circle. There aren't any shaft graves on this side of the circle. There aren't any graves on that side of the circle. Moreover, there are other graves in this area that are not enclosed by grave circle A. So indeed, they didn't really know exactly where. They knew basically where there were graves, but when the grave circle was constructed, nobody knew precisely where the graves were, so they couldn't have been all clearly demarcated. So it's not a matter of, oh gee, we must protect these specific special graves. That can't be it. If that was it, there would have been a circle around them long ago. It must be something else. It must be something more like, what does the Lion Gate proclaim? The Lion Gate proclaims power, authority, might. What does the grave circle proclaim? It portrays, well, it doesn't necessarily portray the history of wealth, because nobody knows what's down inside there, because I think we can all agree that if somebody knew what was down there, we wouldn't have found it. It would have been dug up a long time ago. So they didn't know about the wealth that was inside those graves.
Maybe they did know there was wealth down there, it's just that it was all completely covered up and it was probably guarded.
Well, what's the point of the circle? The point of the circle is not, oh, this is rich. That's not what the circle tells us.
Just to glorify their history.
So it records that there's something important there. It glorifies that there's something important there. And what's the point of that? What's the point of demarcating something from the past? Why bother? Why would you need to do that? Why do you think you would need to do that? I'm looking back in the back row at you in the black Minnesota sweatshirt. They were scared? Did they look scared? Did you see the Lion Gate? They don't look scared. I'm not calling on you two anymore. What's the point? What is the point of marking off a piece of your past? What I hear? To remember it, to respect it, to pass it down, to establish yourself for the future. What were you going to say? Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say it was like, now that they were building Tholoi, they wanted to show that they, I don't know, they wanted to show it off.
To show it off. To show it off, yeah. To establish it, to mark it, to glorify it, to show it off. What's the point of the past? It roots you in a place. It establishes your claim. The past is something that nobody now can change. If you mark it off and if you show it off, nobody can argue with you and nobody can take it away. The Tholoi, thank you for bringing up the Tholoi. The Tholoi link the rulers of Mycenae to that place. They are permanent architectural display of the connection between the people who are buried there and that specific spot. That's about the present. Putting a wall around the grave circles is about the past. All right. That's all very exciting. Well, sometime in the 100 years, probably in the first 50 years or so, after this is done, this was the original wall of the back end of the Citadel of Mycenae. And an extension was constructed so that right here there could be access from inside the walls of the Citadel to a spring back here. And here, if you go up to the Citadel today at Mycenae, here you can see the massive Cyclopean stones that form the entryway down to the bottom, where you then have access to water, because the spring that provided the water for the people who lived at Mycenae, previously access had been outside the wall, but now access was brought inside the wall because, well, a wall was built around and this protected route was created. Oh wait, I forgot to show you one other thing on this. In addition, a new gate was built, a new sort of back way out, a postern gate was built back out of the Citadel. So now there was the Lion Gate coming in, but also this postern gate going out. And in one of the houses down here that was newly enclosed, inside the wall, a very provocative painted vase was found. It's called the Warrior Vase because, as you can see, it shows the painter has chosen to depict a marching line of very interestingly long-nosed, cheerful fellows striding along in armor. So you see them with their helmets, which look, I have always thought, this is so rude, I have always thought their helmets look like upside-down colanders. I mean, really, they look like they have holes in them, and it's, you just think you could take that out and turn it over and drain spaghetti. Yes, they have helmets with these weird rhinoceros-like protrusions, and they have big shields, and the artist has very thoughtfully drawn the shield behind them so that you could admire their body armor, their corselet, their cuirass, their tunic, their cute little fringe skirt, their greaves, and I guess some sort of boot thing on their feet, and they're very, very nice tall lances. So all marching along. It's not only at Mycenae that preparations for something threatening are made. At Tiryns, after the earthquake that damaged the citadel in 1300, this upper citadel, which was originally the only walled area, just like at Mycenae, that citadel was elaborated with additional storage space in the walls. So these additional open galleries in the walls were created, and here you are in the eastern galleries. And on the Citadel of Tiryns, and again you see this massive Cyclopean masonry, and this nice thick-walled gallery opening in which supplies, jars of food, could have been stored. But also, the entire lower citadel was enclosed with a wall at this time. And here you see people standing outside the walls of the lower citadel. And in the lower citadel, just like at Mycenae, another gate had to be constructed so that you didn't have to walk all the way back up to the top and then out. So just like at Mycenae, there are only two gates, a main gate up here to the main citadel, but then this lower citadel had its own sort of back gate, and here is somebody coming down the long steps of that gate, and here is the way out. And so as you can see, this is not an entry gate. This is not some monumental official way in. This is a well-protected, easily closed off way out at the rear, just like the postern gate at Mycenae. At Pylos, we have focused on the main Megaron. Here's the entryway, the main Megaron, the oil storage rooms, the pantries with all of the dishes, the archive rooms, the rooms with the tablets, right here at the very front of the palace. There are lots of other parts of the compound at Pylos. Perfume working areas over here, chariot working areas over here. How do we know that? Because linear B tablets describing those sorts of functions were found in each of these. A second palatial area here with a sort of kind of Megaron with a right angle turn in it, sometimes called the Queen's Megaron. Sometime, actually the date down here is wrong because this should really be about 1300. Sometime around 1250, so in the same century where the secret spring and the postern gate at Mycenae, the additional walls at Mycenae, the additional walls at Tiryns, the postern gate at Tiryns, the galleries at Tiryns are all being built. The palace at Pylos is modified. It had been very open and easy of access. There had been a lot of ways in. You saw a way in here, and up through here, and back through here. All of that was closed off. Now, there's really only one easy way in, and that is at the original main entryway. A lot of subsidiary walls with guard rooms perhaps and a complicated routing passage to get into the side area here. The access from the north is completely closed off. This doorway on the eastern side of the palace is closed off by the construction of these walls that block entry both down here and up here. These were actually probably gardens. They'd been turned into gardens, these rooms. Another wall built in here so that all of the access, almost all of the access routes at Pylos were closed off.
I just got a question. Just to the left of the oil storage rooms in the back, those two doors, just to the left of that, those two doors are still open. Were there other walls outside there?
Well, this complex is built.
Is that closed off? Is that closed off?
Yeah, no, it doesn't seem like it's closed off here, and I don't think it's closed off here, but I am, what I actually think is that we don't have the rest of these walls. I think that there was damage to the end of the walls, and so they weren't found. So, because this is very suspicious looking. I mean, it couldn't have been just like that. There had to have been something. And so, I think it's probable that this was closed off because this was the main way in from this direction, and this is closed off. And I don't think that this would have just been left open like that. But I think we don't have the rest of those walls.
Where did you say the other postern gate was at?
Tiryns and Mycenae. Where are there postern gates found? Mycenae and Tiryns. Some people would see the warrior vase from Mycenae as suggesting that warfare was a common or at least a known activity, and that the warrior vase is kind of canary in the coal mine, a marker of possible threat. More, somewhat more convincingly, there is a tablet from Pylos that records something that can be made to sound pretty ominous, and that is Watchers by the Sea. A tablet that records the position of people who are called Watchers by the Sea. What are they watching for? Could they be watching for an enemy? Could they be watching for an outside threat? Of course, they could be watching for a trade ship. The tablet tells us that such a thing exists, a position called Watchers by the Sea. It's up to you to decide what you think they would be watching for. The springs, the gates, the additional security around the palaces, the additional walls are all for naught. Almost at the same time, as far as we can tell, right around the year 1200, all the palatial centers on the Mycenaean civilization, all the palatial centers on the mainland are destroyed. And they are destroyed dramatically. They are destroyed by fire. This is a view of the oil storerooms, which burned so hard that the jars that had contained the oil practically concretized in place. Of course, they were like, I don't know, firebombs, each one of them being filled with the most flammable possible substance. The palace at Pylos burned completely and thoroughly and was never reoccupied. Tiryns, the lower citadel and the upper citadel, destroyed thoroughly, never reoccupied. Mycenae, the palace, the citadel, all of the structures within the walls, burned thoroughly, never reoccupied. Quite interestingly, the house with the idols and the house with the frescoes, the shrine area down here, steps had been taken to protect these or something prior to the destruction at Mycenae. So the house with the frescoes, this main room, had been filled in with clean dirt and put out of use. The room with the idol cache at the top of the stairs in the back of the house that had the little plastered platforms, the door of the room had been plastered shut and whitewashed. prior to the destruction, which might suggest that the people at Mycenae knew there was trouble coming and looked to protect some parts of their complex that they thought most important. By the year 1200, all 9 of the Mycenaean palatial centers disappeared. Mycenaean Tiryns, gone. Pylos, the Menelaon, all 3 palatial complexes in Boeotia, the complex at Iolkos in Thessaly, the palace that had been on the Acropolis of Athens, destroyed. What disappears forever? Megara. The specific tripartite 2 columns at the entry porch, big hearth in the rear surrounded by 4 columns with some kind of important dais or seat to the side of it. We do not see anything like that again in the Greek world. Monumental art, frescoes of any sort, gone. Tablets and the writing that they carried, Linear B, gone. Monumental fortifications. Tholos tombs. And a lot of people. Surveys, archaeological surveys throughout the Greek mainland show massive depopulation in several of the areas that had Mycenaean palatial complexes. Messenia, Laconia, the Argolid, Boeotia, and Western Attica, so this whole area, had not just Mycenaean palatial centers, but many, many villages, rural farmsteads, large houses, small houses, settlements. Many, many, many of them are no longer inhabited after about 1200. But not everything disappears. For one thing, a couple areas of Greece see an influx of population. The area of Achaia, where there had been no sizable Mycenaean period presence, now has a lot of people living there. And the area of Eastern Attica. A lot of people move into this area. Population actually goes up. Who are these people? Where do they come from? What do we like to know? Well, we have some archaeological clues. Yay for archaeology! For one thing, the kind of pottery that had been made and used in all the Mycenaean palatial centers. You're looking here at Late Attic 3B, that is pottery of the 13th century, the last century when the palatial complexes were in full flower. And you see these very, very busy, beautifully decorated, vivid displays of animals, octopi, and flowers, possibly lilies and rosettes, and just sort of lively, imaginary decor. This is what characterized the ceramics of the last part of the palatial period in the Mycenaean world. In the century following the collapse, the pottery is clearly related to, or the decoration on that pottery, the decoration and the shapes actually, is clearly related to that. It's not a new style, it's not new shapes, it's not a new form of decoration, it's just simplified. So instead of these hyper busy octopi with pretty curlicues at the end of their tentacles, here you have a much more simplified version. But the style is the same. It's dark paint on the clay background itself, just like the late Iliadic 3B pottery of the 13th century. It's some sort of figural representation. Neither one of them is realistic. They're more flexible in their attitude towards representation. So the pottery suggests that the population influx are people who have lived in some of these other places where the population decreases. Palace-based religion disappears. These large standing idols, they go, but popular religion remains. Mycenaean Phi and Psi figurines continue to be found in quantity in late Iliadic 3C, that is 12th century, that is the century after the collapse of the palaces, in these new settlements. The centrally organized religious practice, that goes, but the specific mode of local ceremony must remain because the figurines remain. And finally, whereas the tablets disappear and Linear B disappears, the language of Linear B, not the alphabet, but the language, that must have remained. How do we know? Because 400 years later, when the Greeks finally start to write again, they use a new alphabet, but they write the same language. Because Linear B is Greek. It is the earliest form of the Greek language known. And that's why Michael Ventris was able to decipher it. Because he could recognize, eventually, words and names that we know from classical Greek. For 400 years, the Greeks are illiterate. It's not that they don't speak, obviously, but they don't write. So this complicated 92-element syllabary of Linear B, that's gone. And over those 400 years, among the many things that the Greeks would have talked to themselves about, they might have told some stories. Stories that eventually get written down when the Greeks learn to write again. And when those stories eventually get written down, we get the Iliad, which is why we have it today to read ourselves. So for 400 years, stories that obviously recollected many things, many facts about this lost world floated around. How do we know, obviously? Because some of the places are the same. Thebes or Kamenos, Pylos, Mycenaean, Tyrants come down in song. And now the question you have to decide is, was the song that finally got written down just a song? Just a glorified enlarging of one side of the story, or a poetic recounting of both sides of the story? The Iliad is told to us from the point of view of the Greeks. Archaeology gives us both sides, and now you have to decide if they're true. Have fun, and a good weekend.